Yeah, we are at Zion Ahmed Bays, 7B1, the left column halfway down. So we're talking about that. Um, we said that chickens um, mate in the daytime, so they lay eggs in the daytime. And if you checked a nest, I mean not a whatever it's called, the chicken coop, and there were no nests, there were no eggs before Yontif. You did it Erev Yontif late in the afternoon, and then in the morning, you got up real early, before sunrise, maybe even before dawn, and you checked, and there was an egg in there. You're allowed to eat it on Yontif because you checked it late in the afternoon. We say it's not going to lay, it's not going to lay the egg during the nighttime, so it must have laid in the daytime. You checked. So he said there's an unusual situation, but Rabbi Yochanan says it's possible that Rabbi Yochanan says that we say that the egg came majority out of the chicken of the hen, and it went back in, and then it came back out during the nighttime. So because it was the majority, the rove of it came out in the daytime, so it was considered laid in the daytime, and so it was laid before Yantif. It's not any problem of nolad or muksa on Yantif. So b'mayu kimta b'desafna me'ara. How did we establish this case where it was an unfertilized egg? My Eric Badak. So why is the case is that you checked it right before Yantif in the evening, and then early in the morning, kilo badak nami. Even if you didn't check it, even if you didn't check the egg at all, you shouldn't be allowed to have it because we'll assume that it was laid on Yantif. So the Gemara says, Kilo barak ema me'asmal havai. If you didn't check it before Yantif, we'll say that it was definitely in there before Yantif started. So there's no reason to prohibit it. Ihachi ki barak nami. If so, even when you checked it, ema yatsaruba v'chazrahi. Why don't we say that the majority went out and then it went back in with Rabbi Yochanan, and we should allow it like Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yossi Bar Shal says it's not permitted because Rabbi Yochanan lo shchiach. The case of Rabbi Yochanan, where the egg comes out the majority and then goes back in, and then it gets laid again later, is an unusual situation. So we will not, maybe it's 1 in 1,000. It doesn't exactly say what, but it's very unusual. So we're not going to assume that that's what happened. But then it ends up that well, it doesn't end up, but if you were being conscientious and you checked out, you're going to be in a worse case than if you wouldn't have checked at all. The Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Shal Amarav, Rav Yosef Barshal said in the name of Rav. So this high tuma shchika sakata leguluya, liquefied garlic is dangerous for gila. If you left it uncovered overnight, you're not allowed to eat it because we're worried that a snake came by and put its poison into it, and so you're not allowed to eat it. So this halacha is not really relevant to us, but because it's the same Amora that we just quoted, we quote this teaching from him also. I've said at least once before here, it's possible that in the base medrash, maybe certain students came and said, "What did you hear from your Rebbe?" So he said, "This halacha, this halacha, this halacha, this halacha." So when we quoted that halacha for our Gemara, because that was the way it was taught over in a sequence of other teachings, the Gemara will quote that other teaching also, even though it's not related to us. Now, this halacha, uh, in the so what's the chiddush of this halacha? The chiddush of this halacha would have seemed to be that it's garlic, because there's a halacha that if you have water that was uncovered overnight, you're not allowed to drink it because we're worried that a snake came and put his poison in. And if you would have it, so that halacha exists before. So why did Rav Yosef Bar Shalta say it? Because it was too much chika. It was liquefied garlic. You might think that maybe it doesn't apply to garlic. I would assume that's the chiddush. Now the Rush points out. Oops, the Rush. The Rush points out about this halacha, and it's important to talk about it here. Not that it's an isa. Here, where do I see it? Okay, well, it's not in the. I'm not seeing it in the riff for the Ron, and I'm not seeing it in the Rush. I'm pretty sure that I saw it in a Rishon, but I thought it was one of those that that wouldn't apply nowadays because we don't have snakes all over the place. Um, there are some people though are even nowadays when there's no snakes and all this stuff are pretty worried about it. Um, in that, but we know we don't have snakes around to put poison in. So it's not that the halacha changes, but the halacha was because it was dangerous because the snake might come and you wouldn't know that the snake came and you couldn't tell from the if the poison was in there or not. But nowadays that we know we don't have, we're more the situation is different than the situation was there. So it's not that the halacha changed, but the halacha was because of a certain situation. The situation changed, so that's why we don't have to worry about that. Okay, two dots. Beishamai omrim soor kizayis. So all the way at the beginning of the first Mishnah, we had another machlokas Beishamai Beis Hillel. So the Torah prohibits chametz, leaven products, and it also prohibits sour, sourdough. So now that's a big comeback for sourdough. It's the biggest in thing. I saw last month there it was $20 for a sourdough challah for Shabbos. Well, I mean, at a certain place that will remain unnamed. So in a Mishnah, it said Beis Shammai says that the prohibition of soor of sourdough is with the kizayis and olive, the chametz koseves, and the amount of chametz that you prohibit is the size of a date, which is bigger than the size of the olive. Beis Hillel kizayis. Beis Hillel says the prohibition for both are the size of a kizayis. So that's what the Mishnah in regard to Pesach. So my tamayo beishamai. What's the reason of beishamai that there's different opinion that there's different amounts that kizayis, excuse me, that sourdough has a smaller amount that's prohibited than regular chametz. Im kain list of rachmana. Im kain lift of rachmana chametz l'bay soor. If uh if the prohibition for both were the same, let the Torah just write the prohibition against chametz, and it wouldn't need to tell us about sourdough. The ana amina, and then we would make the following. We would derive by ourselves. Uma chametz she'en chimutzo kasha bekizayis. That which chametz, that it's not such a big level of regular chametz, regular raised, excuse me, dough that has risen, is not such a strong chametz. It's prohibited with the kizayis. So or shachimutzo kasha, the sourdough that it's chametz is very difficult. And I think this means that it's super chametz that it will make something else chametz. I mean, if you put sourdough in something else, we know it's definitely going to make the other thing rise and become chametz. If you take a dough, I mean, it's chametz already, but it's not strong enough to make something else into chametz. I mean, I'm not saying you could put that together on Pesach for Pesach. You can't, but we're talking about the this, the level of 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 chimutz that it has. Lo kol lo kol shekain. So it certainly should be prohibited with the same amount. So or because Rahman alamali. So then why does the pasuk mention the pasuk? You can't have chametz and you can't have seor. And the Rambam and they are counted as two separate mitzvos uh, in the Sefer Mitzvos. So seor because Rahman alamali. So why did the pasuk, the Torah, have to mention that seor sourdough is also prohibited? Lomer l'chashir shalzeh lo kashir shalzeh, to tell us that they have different amounts for which you are prohibited. So Rashi says we can't learn seor from chametz because if chametz is really um, that if the amount of chametz is of regular chametz is like a date, like Beis Hillel says, if you learn something from something else, there's a halacha that it can't be stricter than what you're learning it from. So Rashi says, so if the share for chametz is a koseves, is the size of a date, and we learned something else from it, that prohibition couldn't be less than that size. It couldn't be stricter than what it learns than what we learned it for. That's Rashi's explanation. Tosfos asks a question against that. So Tosfos says, well, how do you know that chametz would be with the amount of a date? Maybe the prohibition of regular chametz would also be a kizayis, and you could learn seor from that and say it's also a kizayis, or maybe a beitza. So he says that Rashi says, which Rashi does say, is this Rashi says as a second explanation that the shiurim is a halacha l'moshe Misinai. So Tosfos says, well, if it's halacha l'moshe Misinai, why are we trying to learn it from a pasuk? We know it from the halacha l'moshe Misinai. So then Tosfos says, well, because we know that the prohibition for other things is the date, like for Yom Kippur, so we're going to learn it from something where we already know. So in general, so we'll talk about this more in a few minutes, but in general, things that you're not allowed to eat, giranasha, basar chalav, all these things, the amount that you're not allowed to eat is a kizayis, the amount of an olive. So why does Tosfos say we learn it out from Yom Kippur that it's a koseves, that it's the amount of a date? Aren't more things prohibited in a kizayis and a koseves? So maybe you could say those things are always, it doesn't matter when you eat them, they're always prohibited. But something that's only prohibited for a specific time, like any food on Yom Kippur, let's say that this amount is a date. So Pesach, you're only prohibited to eat it on Pesach. So let us compare it to a time-related prohibition, which the other amount for that for Yom Kippur is the date, and not to basar chalav or giranasha or chalav, where it's just a kizayis. That maybe could be an explanation in Tosfos. Beis Hillel tzrichi, but Beis Hillel, they need the pasuk to mention both chametz and seor. The because rachmana seor, if the Torah would have only mentioned that sourdough was prohibited, have a mina mishum dechimutzo kasha. I would have said because it's super duper strong chametz, that you put a little bit into something else and it makes that dough into chametz. But regular dough that rose for 18 minutes is not such a strong chametz. Maybe it's not prohibited at all. So therefore, the Torah needs to mention both seor and regular chametz. Now, what about the other direction? The ikaz rachman chametz, if the Torah would have only mentioned regular chametz, mishum d'oray la'achila, I would say that that's prohibited because you can eat it. But sourdough, but sourdough is disgusting to eat because of what it is. You try to eat it, you can't eat it by itself. You have to only put a little bit into other dough and make it into the dough, but you can't eat it by itself. So I might think that there's no prohibition against sourdough at all. Tzricha, therefore, we need the pasuk to tell us both seor and chametz. Uveis Hill Shammai Leisud Reb Zera. Does Beis Shammai not have the ruling of Reb Zera, which is a little strange? Reb Zera was an Amora, was much later than Beis Shammai. But we're saying is that the statement of Reb Zera is so compelling, no one should be able to argue on it. Because normally it would be the opposite. Am I worried? Reb Zera coming from being an Amora has to fit in with Tanaim, right? But why would a Tana have to fit with the Amora? Say, but it seems that Reb Zera's statement makes so much sense. It seems to be so obvious that no one would be able to argue on it. Let's see what it says. Dam Reb Zera says, Pasach hakasu b'sor b'sim b'chametz, lomer lecha. Why does the pasuk first say sourdough and then mention chametz? I don't know why the article here just translates seor as leaven and chametz is chametz. I'm trying to be a little more accurate here. That seor means sourdough, and chametz means regular dough that rose, which is also chametz. No, no. Chita is wheat, and barley, but seora with an I sin ayin vav resh hey. Seora is a barley, but seor in this is sin aleph vav resh. So you're right. It does sound a little bit like barley, but the point of seor is that seor is so powerful, you could put some of it into a different dough and it makes it rise. Because remember, in those days they didn't have yeast by itself. No, it seems that if they wanted to bake bread, they would let the dough rise for like a day, and just whatever yeast was in the air. But because now that we grow it, cultivate whatever from these fungi, we have a packet, we could dump a whole thing in, and then it starts rising right away. But I don't know when yeast we were able to, collect yeast like that. I don't know exactly when it happened, but that's and so when we bake matzah, even without putting yeast in, from whatever spores it could start collecting in 18 minutes, we say that it will start. Well, sourdough is it's even more powerful than regular yeast.
By itself, I don't know, but the fact is, you to keep sourdough going,
You have to keep giving it more, feeding it.
And also there are spores in the air in your kitchen and stuff like that.
But you're not going to just put the dough with that and just let it get whatever is in the air. You're going to take some out and put it in.
Yeah.
So the Amr B'Zer, Pasach HaKazav B'Sor B'Sem B'Chametz, L'Amr L'cha, Zel Sor Zel Chametz. The pasuk starts with Sor and then mentions Chametz to tell you that they're both prohibited. The prohibition is the same for both. So the Gemara says, how could Beis Shammai reject it? So the machloket between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about the amount of chametz, we go to 7b3, and the amount of seor that's prohibited is not in regard to eating. For eating, it's the same amount. They're arguing in regard to destroying the chametz, which means besides for eating, there's an isser of bal yira bal yamatzeh. You're not allowed. It can't be found. Can't be in your possession. So Beis Shammai sabri lo yafinan biur me'achila. Beis Shammai says the amount of chametz or seor which is prohibited to have in your possession is different than the amount that than the shear for eating. Beis Hillel sabri yafinan biur me'achila. Beis Hillel says no, whatever the shear is for achila, that's also the same shear for possessing. Itmar Nami, we also learned a different Amora taught with the similar distinction. Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, Machlokas. Now I don't know. This might be a Bryce. I'm not sure. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. It says Rabbi. Now all Tanaim are Rabbi, but not all Amoraim are Rabbi. I think we spoke about this a couple months ago, unless it was a different time. That the Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael had real smicha, so they were called Rebbe also. So I'm not sure. I have some reference books. Uh, we could look it up in a different time. But I don't know if this Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina is a Tana or an Amora. My guess is he's an Amora. But machlokas in beer, the machlokas in Beit Shammai Silla is only in regard to destroying chametz that's in your possession. But in regard to the revision against eating it, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel both agree that eating chametz or seor, even though seor isn't really edible, but because it's so powerful tasting, you're prohibited to eat a kizayis of either of them. That amount they all agree that the isser for eating is a kizayis, an olive's worth. Tani Nami Hachi, we have a brisa like this. So it didn't say Tani Nami Hachi. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina probably wasn't a Tana, but now we have a brisa that also says like this: Chametz Re'lecha. So there's two different psukim, and they have it in different orders. So the pasuk that is in our girsa seems to not be the proper pasuk. That's why we have the brackets. The brackets are the parentheses saying skip that word in the parentheses and instead substitute the word in the brackets. So chametz should not be seen, and soor should not be seen in your property. This is the machlokus Beit Shammai between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim soor kizayis. That Beit Shammai says the prohibition against owning sourdough is a kizayis. V'chametz koseves, and the amount of owning chametz is with a date amount. Beit Hillel omrim zev kizayis. But Beit Hillel says possessing whether soor, whether chametz is with an olive amount. Okay. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, I don't know if it was last week, we spoke, no, it was the beginning of last week, except Danny asked the question first. So last week we spoke about a topic that wasn't exactly related to our, we spoke about bris milah on Yom Tov Sheni. So even though the Gemara was only talking about funerals, but we said it's something that's related, so we called it. It's not on the daf; it's slightly off the daf, but it's worthwhile. Here I have something that's off the daf, but it's super important and it's more relevant. It's closer related than that was, and that is what Rashi said that shiurim halacha l'moshe Misinai, that the shiurim that we have, the amounts for things is halacha l'moshe Misinai. So let me speak for a few minutes about the shiurim because it's a very, very important topic. So there's a Gemara in Brachos and Sukkah that Eretz Chitas or Geventain of Rimon, Brian's Bar Mitzvah Parsha, the land of wheat and barley, the pasuk that talks about the 7 species of Israel and the figs and the grapes and the olives and the dates. I forgot pomegranates. So Reb Chanan said the whole pasuk is to teach us the shiurim about the amounts in regard to Torah laws. Chita, wheat, is that paschit in lachilas pras. There's a certain tuma that you can get if you wait a certain amount, let's say in a house that has tzaras. And the amount is if you eat a loaf of bread, the amount of time it would eat a certain size loaf of bread. So the halacha is that it would be the amount of time it takes to eat a wheat bread, not a barley bread, not made out of barley flour. So ora barley la'atzem kisor l'tuma. That if you have a human bone that's the size of a barley kernel, that transmits tuma, even though you don't have a whole body, but that would transmit tuma. Geffen, a grape, kidei revius yain l'nazir, that the amount that a nazir is prohibited to drink is a revius. That's the regular amount of wine we know for kiddush and all that stuff. So it's also the amount that a nazir is I think it's prohibited for him to eat any of it, but it won't make him restart his nazirus if he drinks less than a revius, a quarter of a log. So a log is it's less than a gallon, but it's a quarter of that liquid measure. Te'ena, a fig, higogoris loto Shabbos. If you carry the amount of a dried fig, that's what the amount of carrying that's prohibited on Shabbos. Rimon, a pomegranate, l'chol balibatim shenikvu krimonim l'tuma. if you have a kli and the kli became tameh, so some things you can put in the mikvah, some things, depending on what you're made from, they can't be put in a mikvah. So what happens when something gets a hole in it? Well, it depends how big the hole is. If it has any size hole in it, you can't use it as a soup bowl anymore. But you could put, let's say, the soup nuts in it because they're not going to flow out of the hole. What if the hole gets bigger than that? Well, you could put, soup, if the hole is big enough that soup nuts can fall out. Now, the Gemara obviously didn't talk about soup nuts, but something fall. But then you could put nuts. Right, we're gonna get there, right? So nuts, because in those days you didn't buy the shelled nuts; they had it with the, a walnut or whatever with the nut on it, so that couldn't fall. And there's something, and if there's a hole as big, you could still keep fruit in it. But once it's the size of a rimon, once it has a hole the size of a pomegranate, you're not going to put anything in anymore, and it's no longer called a kli, and now it's not tameh anymore. Eretz Shemen, olives, Eretz Shirov Shira Kizayisim, the land that most of the shiurim in it are the amounts of olives, and Dvash, honey of a date, Ki koseves hagasa b'yom kippurim, that the dried out date size that you're prohibited to eat on Yom Kippur. That's what the Gemara says in Brachos and in Nazir. Now there's there's a Yerushalmi at the very beginning of Peah, and it says, so it quotes this. No. Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi Yonah says, "V'chol shiurim lo chachamim heim shenasnu." All the shiurim, it wasn't the chachamim that made it. Kizayis min ameis, kizayis min anavela, v'chadashim min asheretz. Lo asra miyishal el kahani tonight Rab Hoshia. V'ribnei rekom fil kol shehu chachamim heim shamru ma kaser shei kasef. B'kashya mein du smach l'dvar torahu amar chachamim. I'm reading this one. Rabbi Yonah seems to hold that the Chachamim put the amounts for the different things, but Rabbi Yossi Barbun said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yochanan says that all the shiurim are halacha l'Moshe Misinai. So Rav Kook mentioned in one of his letters, it's an interesting letter because he talked about the need to make a new yeshiva where they're going to cover everything, and one of the things he said, even including piyutim. And the person he wrote the letter to, Rav, what was his name? I forgot. I have it here somewhere. But I have a copy. I got it from Hebrew Books. He says, "Well, what do they need to learn piyutim for?" That's a separate discussion. So Rav Kook says, doesn't matter if the shiurim are halacha l'Moshe Misinai, as the Gemara Bavli and Yuma says, or are they a takana of Beis Din, as the Yerushalmi seems to say in Peah, according to Rav Yonah and Rav Hoshia. So it doesn't matter to us what it is, but in regard to when the rubber hits the road, we're not allowed to. If it's a kizayis, we can't have kizayis. If it's a revius, we can't have revius. So if the rubber reaches the road, it doesn't matter. But in regard to limud Torah, you would have to know these different things. Right. Either way, we can't have it. The fact that what the source is, it doesn't have any practical applications, which it actually might, but it's more that when you're learning Torah, you would have to delve into these issues also. So then I found somehow Michal Feinstein, so he was a cousin or a nephew of Ramosha Feinstein. He learned, I think, in Mir, and he was one of the Alter Mirrors. He didn't get married before the war, but then the war happened. He went to Shanghai, then he was able to come to the United States. I think it was briefly in Shanghai, not much. And then during World War II, he was in the Lower East Side with Ramosha Feinstein and with Rav Aharon. because Rav Aaron was there after his father died 2 years later or something. Rav Aaron went to teach with Rav Moshe Feinstein at the First Yerushalayim, and so when Rav Aaron quotes Ramichal, it's from that time period because they were together. And then after the war, I don't know exactly when, Ramichal went to Eretz Yisrael and he married Rav Aaron's cousin, the Brisker Rav Velvel's daughter, one of Rav Velvel's daughters. So he became a son-in-law of the Brisker Rav. So in his shiurim and a mission in Kalim, he talks about this. So he seems to quote from the Brisker Rav. I'm not exactly sure where it was. I'm trying to figure it out. That he said that the share revius, the main share is basically, and this is something that we didn't really go into depth. We didn't go into depth at all for it when we did this in our Beitza, but the regard basically says that the amount of a revius is 2 finger widths by 2 finger widths that are 2.7, a half and a fifth. So a fifth is 0.2 and a half is 0.5. So the volume of 2 width, 2 length, and 2.7 finger widths high. That's the amount of a revius. So why do we say that normally we say the amount of revius is the amount of 1.5 egg volumes. So it's not that the egg volume is the source for it, but that's just an easy conversion factor, but that's not the source. So therefore, so the problem is, and I don't want to talk about this at all, but the Chazon Ish makes a big deal about it, and is that the Chazon Ish, I guess, tried to measure certain things, and the amount of what a kizayis should be seemed to be much bigger than the olives that we have nowadays. So it goes back to the note of Yehuda, like 250 years, I think, about that the items became smaller. Yeah, it's shrinkflation, the original shrinkflation. But what to us looks like a zayis, the egg used to be twice as big. So then it's a little bit strange. So Rabbi Silver at Kirby Avenue, when I was there, he went through this whole thing for sure. I don't remember what, but from the Yehuda and the Chazon Ish and this and that. And then once Rabbi Schwartz was talking about it in a share, so I said, well, what about so what he said is that Rabbi Lazer Silver, who was the head of the Aguda for many years, he lived in Cincinnati, and he might be well known. There's a story that he bought himself like a colonel's uniform from an army surplus store, and after the war, he went through Europe trying to find hidden Jews, children, and he came up with a brilliant plan. I mean, he was a very, very smart man. He started saying Shema by these churches, and the kids that would say Shema with him, he knew were Jewish kids. And I mean, Beryl Wine, Zechron Levracha, in his book, quoted it seemed that Rav Herzog had met with the Pope and came to Chicago shortly thereafter, and Rav Herzog was asking the Pope, all these kids who were hidden, let them come back. And he said there are no Jewish kids in any of the churches. And Rav Herzog was so disgusted with the Pope's attitude, when he left, he asked someone to take him directly to a mikvah, that he felt like he was in the presence of such tuma. And Beryl Wine said that Rav Herzog made, when everyone shook his hand after the share that he gave at Beis Medrash Torah, he says, remember what I said. Remember, he said, do something to help Klal Yisrael. Right. So the Pope said there are no Jewish kids. Obviously, they came there. We must have baptized them, so there are no Jewish kids. And Reb Lazer Silver, made this test, and he started saying Shema. And when the kids who knew Shema, he took them because they clearly were Jewish kids. So Reb Lazer, so Rabbi Schwartz mentioned that Reb Lazer Silver wrote this whole thing. He rejected completely. About this idea of niskatnu hashiurim, that the olives got smaller than they used to be. So he said, it's really ironic that Reb Lazer Silver's grandson I heard this whole share from him about and he's got no shiurim. So the next time I was at Rabbi It's over. I told him this story. I said, remember this thing? And he's like, yeah, here and here. So I said, I told him the story that Rabbi Schwartz, who actually Rabbi Silver himself had learned from Rabbi Schwartz how to set up Gittin, how to arrange Gittin when he was uh, 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 doing Dayanis at YU many decades ago. So he was, when he asked me, what am I doing? I'm like, oh, I watch Rabbi, he's like, I'm watching Rabbi Schwartz write Gittin. He's like, I watched him write Gittin in New York 35 years ago. But that's part of the interesting, Masorah that when we learn and, a Talmidim of the same person or Talmidim of a Talmud and see these things, it's better than Jewish geography. But so the whole idea of Niskat no Shiurim is something that is important. So Reb Michel Feinstein said that kizayis, though, the main thing is the kizayis. But in regard to the liquid share of a revius, the Beitza isn't the actual share, it's just an easy conversion factor, but it's not the main thing. So the share is different. So even if a Beitza, the egg got smaller, it didn't change the amount of a revius because the Beitza isn't the definition of the share. But that's not the same for kizayis because this share is actually based on a kizayis. So it says if this is a zayis, then that's the amount that you could eat, or that let's say you'd have to eat if you're eating matzah on Pesach night, or the amount you're not allowed to eat if it's bas b'chala. So part of this was Reb Michel Feinstein saying that Reb Chaim Volozhiner had a lenient shita of kizayis, but the Brisker Rav, it seems, he doesn't say by Brisker Rav, he just says Maran Zatzal, which is probably Brisker Rav, that because in many places Rashi says that a zayis is half a beitza. So whatever. Okay. So oops. So how could one opinion you're telling me say it's derabanan, the Rabbanan made the thing, and on the other hand we have halacha l'mosh Misinai. They seem to be very, very opposite extremes. Halacha l'mosh Misinai is a direct Masorah. It's not even in Chumash. It's how good. So the Rav Yashaber has a yortzeit share that he gave for his father, where he said that certain psakim of the Beis Din Hagadol that they voted on unanimously could never be undone. So we spoke about a month. Well, no, not a month. It was still younger, but we spoke about when did we talk about it? I don't remember the context, but I think we mentioned something about Davar Sheba Minyan. If something was voted on by Sanhedrin, you need another Davar Sheba Minyan to undo it. We spoke about there's a steer and well, the way we have Rashi, even if it was for a certain reason and the reason doesn't matter anymore, it seems that you would need a new vote of Sanhedrin anyway. Whereas Tosfos and Sanhedrin, the quotes Rashi that Rashi doesn't say that. So we talked about Sanhedrin making a vote. So Rav Yashaber, if I'm not mistaken, says that if certain things, when the Sanhedrin Agadol voted and it was a unanimous psak, it can never be overturned. So it could be that in regard to making these shiurim, because Rav Yashaber mentions things from the Rambam and this and that. On one hand, the Rambam says halacha l'mosh Misinai is something that you cannot have a machlokas about. If this was a tradition all the way from Moshe, there's no way we could have a machlokas about it. Yet we seem to have machlokasim about halacha Moshe Misinai. And what? So he answered that there's two types of halacha Moshe Misinai. Something that literally was all the way from Moshe Rabbeinu. There can never have been any machlokas about it. But certain things are because Sanhedrin voted unanimously to a certain thing, it can never be overturned. So we call it halacha Moshe Misinai, but it's not the same halacha Moshe Misinai as something that Moshe got from Har Sinai. So it could be that when some Gemaras call it halacha Moshe Misinai, and Rabbi Yonah in the Yerushalmi Peah seems to say that it's a derabanan. So maybe we could explain it that it's a rabbanan halacha Moshe Misinai, but it was a unanimous fact in the Sanhedrin, so it can never be changed. That's a possible answer. Rabbi Asher Weiss, I hadn't really heard of him, and they brought him to Chicago about 6 years ago, probably just less than 6 years ago. When the most recent Siyam Hashas, he was here in Chicago. He was, I think his mother was Canadian or American, so he speaks very fluent English. It was a small accent, but he's fluent in English, and he lives in Ramot. And I never heard of him really. And he has a brother who's has a based in Montreal, I think. But during COVID, he came out. That's when I heard of him. He was very. If the doctors say this, you have to do this. You can't make a minion. If they say that you can't have it because of health reasons, you can't be too from and make a minion. And he was in favor of the people getting the vaccines when they came out. So Rav Asher Weiss, that's when I really started hearing about Rav Asher Weiss. So, to my detriment, but he has a share here from. Well, the share is probably from older, but they sent it out for Shabbos. I don't know, 4.5 years ago, 5772, for Parshas Akev about the shiurim, starting with the Gemara that I quoted, that this pasuk is all to tell us shiurim. So Rabbi Bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, shiurim, chatzitza, and mechitzin der halacha Moshe Misinai. But the Gemara says, but shiurim are diaraisa because of this pasuk, eretz chitas or the way we said. So he tries to discuss what does it mean. Is it halacha Moshe Misinai? How could it be derabanan? So he mentions on our Gemara here. I don't have the sefer. I didn't have time to download it from HebrewBooks.org, but the Noda Yehuda wrote, besides for his chuvos, which are called Noda Yehuda, he wrote commentary on several Masechtas and Shas. It's very excellent, but it's a lot to read. And on Beitza, on our Gemara here, he says that there's no one who's argued that the shiurim are halacha Moshe Misinai. They were not takanas chachamim. But the question is, how much of the details were given straight from Har Sinai or not? That this is a kizayis is definitely from halacha Moshe Misinai, but Rav Yonah and Rav Hoshia, who say it's derabanan, they say that this is the way Rav Asher Weiss is quoting it, the way I'm understanding it here, is that they didn't say which shear applies to which halacha. We know that the kizayis is a diraisa, the dried out date, the fig, the barley. That is all diraisa, but it did. But the halacha Moshe Misinai didn't include what halachas are attached to kizayis, or what kizayis is attached to which halachas, or the dried out fig is attached to which halacha. So that's he quotes the tzach, which is the Noda Yehuda, and then he says the Netziv says that it's a Gemara in Tamura that when Moshe died was when Moshe on the last day of his life, he asked Yeshua, before I died, do you have any questions you need to clarify? And Yeshua said, did I ever leave your tent? And because of that, he was punished and they forgot. I forgot 300 halachas or 700 halachas, and they weren't, and they were forgotten until the time of Osniel ben Kenaz, who was the first shofet. So after Yeshua died, he was able to re-figure out these halachas that had been forgotten because of Yeshua's seemingly haughty comment. So the Netziv says that they were originally halacha Moshe Misinai, but we forgot what connected to what, and then the Chachamim reconnected this to this and that to that. And then Rav Asher Weiss tries to give his own shot here, and basically, in regard to, let's say, Malach on Chol HaMoed, which that's his third example, he gave other, that certain things we're not allowed to do in Chol HaMoed, but what are they? Because we say if malacha is completely asur on Chol HaMoed, how could if there's a davar avot, something that would be lost, how could you do it? There's no heter davar avot on Shabbos. or on Yantif. So if it's diraisa, how could there possibly be such a heter? So the Ramban, he doesn't seem to quote it from the Ramban, but the Ramban and other Rishonim hold that the Chachamim, that the Torah gave that for certain based on certain reasons, the Torah gave over to Chazal to decide what is prohibited on Chol Hamoed. Malachos are asur on Chol Hamoed, but it's up to Chazal to decide what. So that is how it's diraisa, but it's more lenient than the malachos that are asur on Yantav. So Rabbi Asher Weiss says, and I'm not exactly sure how this is much different than the note of Yehuda, but there's halacha Moshe Misinai of shiurim, and then the Chachamim, I guess, decided what goes with what. Okay, so it's a very important topic, kizayis and this and that. Oh, and then there's a separate thing. Rabbi Yochanan holds it's a machlokas in, I think it's around Daf Tezvav in Bava Kama. Oh, there in Bava Kama it comes up because Chatzin Nezek Troros, I think. But there's a I might be mixing it up with something else. But Rabbi Yochanan holds Chatzi Shir Asr Min HaTorah, that if you eat, let's say, half a kizayis of Giranasha or a Bas B'chalav, it's completely asr on the Torah level. It's just that you don't get punished unless you eat an olive's worth. But even Chatzi Shir, the half amount is already asr min Torah. To carry half of the figs volume is asr on Shabbos without an eruv. But you couldn't put to death or have to bring or get a chiyuv kares if you had less than the full amount. When we say chatzi shir, it doesn't literally mean half, but it means any amount is already prohibited in the Torah. Okay, so this is not an exhaustive content about shiurim, but we covered a lot of very important ideas, I think, about these shiur. There's plenty more to talk about, but that's what we're going to talk about right now about it. Okay, 2 dots. In the Gemara, it's about 5 lines down from the lines get wide, and 7b3 left column at the bottom, where it's a new paragraph. The Gemara will now discuss the third and final dispute recorded in the Mishnah. So when we shech the behema, a domesticated animal, you shech it and that's it. But the halacha is if you shech the chaya, let's say a deer, or an undomesticated animal like a deer or a bird, we have to do a mitzvah called kisayis adam, covering the blood. And actually, it's related to this week's parsha. No, this week's parsha. According to a medrash, when Eliezer and Rivka came back, and Rivka saw Yitzchak davening in the field, she fell off from her camel and she said, "Who is that?" And Eliezer says, "That's my master." So there's a medrash that says that she fell off the camel and is related to ksuvos. She fell down and she broke her basulim. Her hymen broke, and so she didn't have any dam basulim anymore. But the birds covered over the blood, and so they didn't know that she wasn't a basula anymore, because the Torah says basula v'ish lo yada. But this medrash, why the medrash says I don't remember, but that's what the medrash says. And based on that, in appreciation to the birds covering up the blood, so there wouldn't be any scandal, we cover up the birds' blood when we shach them. Now that doesn't have to do with chaya, so that's not the reason for it, but that's a medrash significance for the halacha of kisei adam. So there's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So you're allowed to shach on yantif, so you have fresh food, but the thing is, you to make a hole, to crumble the dirt, there's malacha problems on yantif. So the Mishnah says, Beis Shammai says you could stick in a spade to get dirt and cover the blood, and Beis Hillel says you shouldn't shech unless you had dirt already prepared from before yantif, because first of all it must be loose already, and you prepared it already, so it's not muksa. I think I mentioned about having to throw the rocks at the cars driving in Me'asharim on Shabbos. So because they allegedly put the stones aside before Shabbos, so they weren't muktzah. But the point is, I said, how do you know? Do they not leave that spot the whole Shabbos? And the car was only going to go on that specific road, whatever. So that's the other bachlok of Rabbi Sil. So hashochet. So it says if someone hashochet is, and we're interpreting that means if someone shafted, the have it in l'chadchila lo. If they already did, then this is the halacha. But l'chadchila, we shouldn't let someone shaft because they don't have dirt prepared. That's how the Gemara wants to interpret Beis Shammai's opinion. Aim a seifa, but we have a question on this. But if you look at the next clause in the Mishnah, Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot. Beis Hillel says you cannot shaft, and that's l'chadchila. That's before the fact. You should not shaft. B'chlal the Tanakama savar yishchot. And from the fact that Beis Hillel says you can't, that implies that they're arguing on the opinion who holds that l'chadchila you can shaft on Yantav. B'chlal the Tanakama savar yishchot. So how can you say that hashochet means b'diavad? If you shafted, then you can cover it. But from the fact that Beis Hillel says lo yishchot, that means that Beis Shammai must hold l'chadchila you are allowed to shaft a bird or a chaya on Yantav. So halakasha. So we can say that that's not a problem. Lo yishchot v'yachasik. Beis Hillel means you can't shaft and cover. So Beis Hillel says that Rashi says, the way Rashi says, you can't complete the act of shechita, which is the kisoy. Now, really, kisoy adam is its own mitzvah, but Rashi seems to count it as part of the process of shechita. So lo yishchot, because you're not going to be able to do the full, all of the needed steps of a shechita, because you won't be able to cover it. So you could say that it's even after you already shechted it, and Beis Shammai says, oh, because you did the shechita already, finish covering up, and Beis Hillel says you're still not allowed to finish covering it up. Now, it's not an avera, but you missed doing out mitzvah saseh. It's a positive command to cover the blood. So if you didn't, you missed doing a positive commandment. It's like not putting on tefillin for a day. I mean, that's not literal, but I'm saying you had an opportunity to, you had this obligation, and you can't do that mitzvah. Ema seifa, but if we look at the clause, the second clause of Beis Hillel, or after that, umodim she'im shachat sheyichver deka. They agree that if you did shach, you should dig with a spade and cover, and meaning to get dirt out and cover it. That implies that the first case that they're arguing about is before the fact, is a chadchila. So how come the Gemaras keep trying to say that even Beis Shammai holds that the chadchila you're not supposed to shacht? So it's clear that with this question that we have to explain that Beis Shammai holds you're lechatchila allowed to shaft a bird or a chaya on Yantav. Amar Rabbi. So Rabbi says, Hachikamer, this is what the Mishnah means. Hashochet shabali malech. A shochet who comes and asks a shaila, what can I shaft this bird, or can I shaft? I was lucky to snare I have this. Let's just keep it with the bird. Ketzad Omer Lo, what should the posek answer him? Beis Shammai says, Omer Lo, shchot chafor v'chaseh. Shacht it, put the spade in to get some dirt and cover the blood. Beis Hillel Omer Lo yichchad elim kein hayo lo afer muchen mibod yom. And Beis Hillel says that what does the posek tell him? You're not allowed to shaft unless you already had earth set aside before Yantif, because then it's loose and it's not muktzah. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says the Mishnah is telling a slightly different thing. Hachika Amar, Hashochet Shabali Malech. If someone is coming to shacht and he asks the posek, what should I do? It's Yantif. Do I cover the blood of this chicken I'm about to shacht? Ketzad Amar Lo, what should we tell him? Beishamei Amar Lo Lecha For Shchot V'Chasei. Go dig and then shacht and cover. So it's the same thing, but he says dig, loosen the dirt first and then shacht and cover it. Beis Hillel is the same. You can't shacht unless you already have dirt prepared from before Yantif. So Amar le by the Rabbi Yosef, Lema Mar Barabba, Lema Mar Barabba Rabbi Zera, Amarav Kamiflu. So Rabbi, we've mentioned this in the past couple of weeks. Rabbi was a Talmud of Rabbi Yosef. We spoke to him in the third person. So Rabbi says, can it be that what Rabbi says, what Mar, my master says, and Rabba are arguing about Rabbi Zera Amarav? The Amar Rabbi Zera Amarav, because meaning what's the difference between what Rav Yosef and Rabba said was the order. Rabba says you tell him shach, then uncover the dirt and cover, and Rav Yosef says loosen the dirt first and then shach and then cover. That's the order that we come to do. So what's the nafkamina between them? Why don't we say the nafkamina is the difference in din, the where the rubber meets the road? What's the difference between the two things? Is in Reb Zera's halacha. The Amar Reb Zera, where am I? Amarav, Reb Zera said in the name of Rab. Hashochet tzarich sheyitin afar lamata v'afar lamala. When you shecht a behema, or excuse me, a chaya or an oaf, you need to have dirt underneath it and dirt on top of it. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "V'shavach has damo." If you'll spill the blood of the chaya or of the bird, v'chisaba afar, you will cover it in dirt. Afar lo nemer. It doesn't say kiko afar. Cover it dirt. Ela be afar in dirt. Malamet shachar tzarich sheyitin afar lamata v'afar lamala. To tell us that when you shech, you need to have it's that the blood is in a kind of like a sandwich of dirt, not just dirt on top, but you have to have dirt on the bottom, dirt on top. And I would never add a shechita house for birds, but the nafkamina would be if you're on a concrete floor, you'd have to put dirt down first, and then when you shech it on there, you put more dirt on top. So why don't we say that's the difference? That Abaye is saying, you, my Rabbi Yosef, who says you have to start dig up some dirt before you shach. That's because you're making sure there's dirt underneath where you're going to shach, so the blood goes on top of the dirt, and then you're going to put more dirt on top. Whereas Rabbah, who says you say shach and then dig and then cover it, you don't need the dirt underneath. That's what Abaye is trying to learn. Demar Isa the Reb Zera, because you, Reb Yosef, agree with Reb Zera, but Rabba lays the Reb Zera. Rabba rejects the halacha of Reb Zera. Amarle, Reb Yosef says, Bein ledidi, bein leRabba, Islan Reb Zera. Both me and Reb Zera, and Rabba agree with the halacha of Reb Zera that you have to have dirt underneath the blood and dirt on top. But this is what we're arguing about. Rabba savar ika afar lamata in ilolo. Rabba holds if there's already dirt underneath, that's good. Then Beishamai will let you cover it. Elo, low. But if there's not dirt on the bottom, we don't allow you to dig up to get dirt on the bottom. They agree that you'll have dirt on top, but you don't dig the dirt on the bottom. Well, but according to me, Rav Yosef, hadifa. What I'm saying is better. The elo sharis lay, because if we don't allow him to dig up before and put dirt on the ground before he shachs, he might withhold himself from shafting the animal completely in the first place, and then he won't have fresh meat for Yantif. So because of, it seems like Reb Yosef is saying, because of Lachli Reb Zera, we want him to make sure to do the kisei dam the right way, that he has that he has dirt on the ground before he shachs the bird. Okay, to that. Umodim. Okay, we're 3 lines up from the bottom and halfway down the right-hand column, 7 before. Umodim shishachat. Beis Hillel agrees that if you're already shafted, you should stick a spade into the ground and cover it with it. Okay, Reb Zreika, Reb Yehuda, Reb Zreika said Reb Yehuda, who sheyesh lo deker notes mi bodyon. This is only, you're not allowed to stick the spade into the ground, but this is only okay if you already had the spade stuck in the ground before Yata. Now it's possible that the spade is muktzah, because it's a tool. What do? You dig with it. Are you allowed to dig on Yantif? No, it's a tolda of plowing, even though you're not plowing. But to make a small field is a small hole is a tolda. So first of all, to carry the spade, to move the spade itself would be muktzah. So unless somehow you designate it to, you're going to use it as a nutcracker. I don't know. It's like using right, like using the elephant gun to kill the mosquito. Something much bigger than you need, but you're doing something mutter with it. And then the other problem is it seems that the dirt itself might be muktzah. So from the fact that you stuck it in before, it's not muktzah, and the dirt from where you put it isn't muktzah because you're saying I'm going to be using this on Yantif, or I have the potential to use it on Yantif. And so basically the whole problem was muktzah, and by the fact that you had the spade put in the ground before Yantif, there's no muktzah problem anymore. So that means that there's no diraisa problem. There's no malacha going on here. It's only a muktzah problem. So the question is, it seems that there are diraisa problems. But you're probably going to have a clump of dirt, and you're going to have to crumble the dirt in order to cover the blood. If you put the clump on top, it doesn't cover the blood. And so that would be a tolda of tchina, of grinding, like grinding the wheat into flour. Good question. The answer is no. And we're saying because it's Yontif Sheni, Yontif Sheni is a separate kedusha, and well, we saw it to machlokas rishonim. We saw it to machlokas rishonim. Some rishonim say the goy would have to dig the grave, so maybe according to that it would be, but according to the opinion that the Yisrael digs the grave, this is talking about even on Yontif Rishon. This is talking about even the first day Yontif. And what we were talking about, it's a good question, but the answer is that Yontif Sheni, and we know that it's only a suffix nowadays. So the Chachamim were lenient in regard to a mace on Yontif Sheni. So that I think is based on the presumption that it's not really Yontif. We still have to keep 2 days of Yontif, but it's not really Yontif, so they were makel for burying a and that would only be according to the opinion that the Yisrael is allowed to dig it. According to the Rishonim, that a Yisrael isn't allowed to dig the grave, even in Yontif Sheni, they hold a Yisrael can't dig the grave.
Okay, but it's simple. You have dirt prepared ahead of time. You can take somebody's.
No. But that's because
how about having a
you can't
prepared before Yontif or two.
Right. So the thing, no. So the thing is that the Chachamim is that the Gemara in Moed Katan, I think Dafchas seems to hold that they used to prepare either graves just in general. They didn't have machines, so if people would be in a digging mood, they'd say, hey, "We're going to dig 10 graves." The next 10 people, or if they were, like in the rock, and they would carve out a bunch at a time. So in that case, so you didn't have to dig the grave, but you would still have to cover the grave. So then the problem would be covering the grave.
So you got the dirt ready.
Well, the thing is that if it was dug out, now it's loose, right? So there's not going to be any problem of grinding it. And anyway, when you bury the person, it could be clumps also. It's not like blood that has to be covered. To cover the aron or even the body, the clumps enough, could cover it. But I don't see that as a question. I mean, but it's a good point that you make. And unfortunately, for those of us we have certain cemeteries that are very, very clay Indian, what do we call it? Indian clay dirt. That's terrible, very difficult to use. And right here, it's very fine dirt that's very easy to pick up and bury. eminent today.
Yeah. I mean, he throws stuff, he throws it. Yeah, that's it.
What's it called? Westlawn is terrible clay. But you have to crumple up the dirt to cover up the blood of the bird when you shecht it, or of the chaya. So that's a malacha of it's a tolda of grinding. So Amar Chia bar Ashi Amarav, as we turn to Chesed Aleph, ba'afar tichuach. The dirt that you have is loose dirt. That's very granulated, and you don't have to crush it at all. But when you pull up the spade, which was ready in the ground, you're making a hole, and making a hole is a tolda of bona, of building. So could Rav Abba, we have to explain it like Rav Abba, the Amar of Abba, because Rav Abba said, "Hachofer guma v'Shabbos ve'ino tzarech afra." If you dig a hole on Shabbos because you only needed the dirt, pater aleha. It's not a malacha, because a malacha is when you do something for its own sake. Here you don't need the hole; you only need the dirt. How do you get dirt? Well, you have to make a hole. So because you don't actually need the hole, it's called a malacha shein tzarich legufa, a malacha that's not needed for the main thing, for the essence of it, the itself, and therefore it's not a malacha. So now we say that because the spade is in the dirt before Shabbos, before Yantav, you can pick it up to get the dirt out if it's loose dirt, and it's not a problem of binyan either, because you don't need to make the hole. You only need the dirt that's in the hole, and like Rav Abba, so that's not a malacha. We'll leave it here. Any questions, Jeff?